Have you played Pick 6 from DraftKings yet? What are you waiting for? You better get on it. The playoffs are here and time is running out. As the official daily fantasy sports partner of the NFL, DraftKings does fantasy sports like no one else. Play for better payouts on Pick 6. It's super easy to get started. Select two or more players, choose if they'll have more or less of a stat like touchdowns, yardage, sacks, and more. Pick 6 is available in most states including Missouri, California, Texas, Georgia, and more. And DraftKings is making it even sweeter for the first timers. New Pick 6 customers play $5, get $50 in Pick 6 credits. Win more cash on Pick 6. Download the DraftKings Pick 6 app and use code THPN. That's code THPN for new customers to play $5, get $50 in Pick 6 credits. Only on DraftKings Pick 6. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 is not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. One per new customer. Bonus awarded as non-withdrawable Pick 6 credits that expire in 30 days. Limited time offer. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos. Just changing the topics here. I feel like it's a good enough time to take a look at the potential trade deadline moves that the Canadiens may partake in. Obviously, their position in the standings will dictate what they do, but I think we both can assume they'll be, what's the right word to hear? Like, not a heavy seller, but just potentially a light seller. They might unload some of their upcoming UFAs, but not do anything drastic. So let's take a look at some of the bigger names on the board here. Obviously, the Canadiens will not be going after any of these guys. You'd probably assume so, but if we want, let's maybe give a couple predictions. What's going to happen with these guys? I feel like there's some pretty big names this year. Last year, maybe a little bit less, but a guy like Chris Kreider, the Rangers have been really struggling, and they are very much in need of a shakeup, whether that's Zibanejad moving, whether that's Kreider, whether that's, they've already moved Trouba. Who knows what's going to happen, but a lot of Americans here now that I notice it, but Chris Kreider, Patty Kane, Trevor Zegras, any predictions?
Well, before I go into any predictions, I was going to also say that amidst all these guys, rumblings about these guys being traded, there's also the speculation about Elias Pettersson and JT Miller being moved, or one of the two being moved by the deadline, which I think is really interesting because any two of those guys being traded bolsters a competitive team's roster, right? I mean, we already heard about not the speculation, but the rumor that, or it was confirmed, so it's no longer a rumor, but there was an offer by the Rangers to trade away Zibanejad for JT Miller, which is an interesting trade. I think that Vancouver was probably right to stay still on that, but it doesn't change the fact that both those guys probably need a change of environment. And who knows? I mean, I think I want to hear what you have to say. I think that the Canucks giving up on Elias Pettersson, if they were to, would be a huge mistake.
For sure. That's my opinion. I feel like you got to stay with the younger guy, the guy who's put up 99 points. I know JT's had some really good success, but as much as I love JT Miller because I think he's a dog, like literally the hardest worker, it just seems like wherever he goes, there's always an issue. And obviously we only hear what the press says, so it could be inflated, but I don't think it's the right idea to move on from Pettersson. Maybe it's a bigger return, but just in terms of age and what they bring to the lineup in terms of their skills as well, I think staying with Pettersson is probably the better idea. Do you think one of them is moved by the trade deadline?
Yeah, part of me does. Part of me does because I don't think that Vancouver loves where their squad is at right now. I think that obviously missing Demko for the large part of the beginning of the season was tough. Now that he goes out again and he's day to day, and they're kind of almost depending on Kevin Lankinen to be that backbone in nets, which is something that a team with playoff hopes cannot do, in my opinion. Like, I don't get me wrong, I think Kevin Lankinen is a very qualified backup, but I don't think he's a guy that could lead a team. And I just think that there's too many. Like, again, we talk about a team that's able to patch up holes quickly. And I think that if Pedersen goes out or JT Miller goes out or Quinn Hughes goes out, their team kind of just falls apart. And I don't think that they did a good enough job in the offseason to really bolster this roster and make it even more competitive than it was last year. So I think that if they could get a sizable return for JT Miller or Elias Pettersson, I do think that there is a good chance that one of them gets moved. I just think that if they move off Pettersson, they're going to regret it for years and years and years, especially after giving him the contract that they gave him, you know?
Yeah, I think that's a fair take. Just in terms of the guys on the list, uh, due to Zegras' injury, I would assume he's probably not moved. Um, I also, for some reason, want to think that Patty Kane stays in Detroit. He signed there knowing they're no, they're not a favorite to win the cup. So he's with his buddy DeBrincat and Tarasenko. I just don't see him moving, but I do see a world where John Gibson is traded, and I think Anaheim's been trying to build up his trade value, playing him much more than their better goalie, in my opinion, Dostal. So Gibson has shown some promise after coming back from his injury. I really see a world where he's traded to the Hurricanes. There was an update finally today on Freddie Anderson, fantasy owners finally, but he's still ways away. So I think it would be a very good idea for Carolina to trade for him, considering they haven't been as hot as they were at the start of the year.
No, that definitely makes sense. I don't mind it. I think the only question mark there is you'd be adding another injury prone goalie, which doesn't bode well for that Carolina
Yeah,
team.
that's
That's
true.
just incredibly unlucky in that sense. I was going to ask you a question. I think it's a fun game to play. I'm going to ask you. So right now, at this given moment, the Habs sit right outside the second wildcard spot in the East, which is something that, like I said, if you go back to episode 93, October 15th, I don't even know, like this would be completely out of the conversation altogether. But we are here. And by the way, I do think that we said, in the Atlantic division that the Canadians were going to be, I think we got a bit of backlash for saying that they'd finish fifth or sixth in the division. Well, here we are now.
Yep.
I was going to ask you, let's play this game because right now we don't know if the Canadians are going to make the playoffs, but let's assume let's play both sides of the coin here. My question is, if the Canadians were to pick up one guy, assuming they're buying, and if they were to sell one guy from their current squad, who it personal preference? Is there anyone that comes to mind for you? Like one guy on each side of those
I'll start with who I think the Canadians would sell first, and I think that would be Armia. I think he brings the most um, all around game. He's shown that he's able to score goals. He's a good penalty killer, and he's that type of player that a playoff team would want to pick up and I think would pay for at the deadline. He's a big body, obviously. So I like Armia. Also, obviously, he's a pending UFA. So I think Armia would be the one that the Canadians would sell on. And then in terms of this list, I think honestly, Brock Nelson would be a guy that the Canadians would bring in for a playoff run. He's a proven scorer, hasn't had as much success this year. He's an older guy now, but brings some stability down the middle. Um, and I think he would be the type of player that the Canadians would like to add to the team. I think they have enough skill, and I think Brock Nelson would bring something to bolster the lineup, not necessarily be a guy who's going to go out and be point per game, but just bring some stability.
No, that's very fair. That's very fair. I think that that's a solid answer. I think that one in particular is a very tough one to answer because if you think about it, like you know what, let me throw it back. I'll throw it up here on the board in a second. I think that if you think about it, this Canadians team is kind of so fragile in the sense that what's worth changing right now?
Yeah.
What's worth like if you look at this roster right now here, we're using Puckpedia, looking at salary cap as well. I mean, ultimately, aside from Pizzetta right now and at the bottom of the list, Struble, because those guys are obviously replaced by Line um, and Savard. I mean, you can't if you're making a playoff push, you're not going to go out and trade Dvorak or trade Gallagher, or trade Evans or trade Armia. You know what I mean? Like it just wouldn't
Yeah.
make very much sense. But I think that your answer makes sense where Brock Nelson could kind of he could play a bit of wing. You could find a spot for him. There's no doubt about that. Um, and I think my follow up question to you, Liam, was if the Canadiens are in a selling spot, do you move Jake Evans? Yes or no?
I want to say no. I think Evans has really proved this year that he could be much more than a fourth line center. And I know it's a career year and that typically he's not on pace for 50 points, but sometimes guys break out. I know it's a late breakout, but I think Evans brings something very valuable to the team. And I don't think he would ask for a lot of money if he were to come back. So I'd rather keep Evans than a guy like Armia, Dvorak, or even Savard in that case. So yeah, I would re-sign Evans.
I 100% agree. I think here's my idea on it. I think that the Canadians, obviously, you look back on that Justin Barron trade, and you could say that, yeah, they got, you know, a sufficient amount of compensation, right? Because they didn't just get Barron in that deal; they also got a first, correct, or a
I
second,
think it was a second, yeah.
a second. Who I forget who he went and drafted, but I saw it the other day, and obviously, I think that the trade overall kind of worked out. But I do think that Lehkonen, although he would never have these numbers with the Canadians, right? He's putting up, like a 60 point season is like it's kind of nothing, but he's playing alongside McKinnon, Rantanen, Makar, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I do think that getting rid of Lehkonen was that stability piece in that middle six who wouldn't require a large cap hit and who's still young. And I think that, don't get me wrong, I think that obviously different player than Evans, but Evans is kind of similar in the sense that he's not going to require a ton of money. He's 28 years old. He's very versatile, like I said before, and I think that that's something that you can only that a team that wants to be competitive can only dream of having. And to get rid of him right now, yeah, even if you're given a decent amount of compensation, I think that in the long run it might not pay off because this is the guy that in 2 years from now, when the Habs are presumably, let's hope, pushing for a top three in the Atlantic Division type spot, you're gonna want this guy in your middle to bottom six. Primarily your
100%.
bottom six. You're gonna want him though.
Yeah, for sure. And do you think that number is higher than 3 million? Is it higher than 4 million? And what's the term on this contract?
It's a good question.
I don't think he's a 6-year contract guy, but I also don't think it's going to be, a 1 or 2 year deal.
No, I agree. And I saw someone that was speculating about, just giving him three years with a total of 10 million, so about 3.3 a year, give or take, which is obviously I think would be very ideal, right? You basically double his current salary, his current cap hit for 3 years. And then you know what? Once he's 31 years old, we see where we're at because you don't want to be signing Jake Evans for 6 more years at a $4 million cap hit. All of a sudden, now you're kind of setting yourself back. I think Kent Hughes and company know what they're doing, but if I had to pick, I wouldn't mind paying him at 3.5 million for the next 3-4 years. I don't think it's that bad, especially when Gallagher, Anderson, Armia, Dvorak are going to be off the books in, like Dvorak's in the last year of his contract. Anderson has 2 more, Gallagher has 2 more, and Armia is off the books after this year. So that's a
And
lot of
Savard,
cap space to go. Right, that's a lot of cap space to go around. So all that being said, I wouldn't mind overpaying him just a bit to keep him around because we know how valuable he'll be down the stretch. That's my view on it.
and considering the cap is going up significantly, I think it makes a lot of sense as well.
Yeah. What's the max you'd pay him? Not that I mean, it's kind of hard to speculate,
Probably
but would you
I'd
give
say
him 4 mil?
I think I'd say 375.
Right. Yeah, and I
I
agree.
feel
I
I
wonder
feel
what he'll.
yeah, I feel like 4 is gonna be what third liners make. But I think right now, I think 375, 3.5 makes sense.
I
And
mean, in
also
our
you
world
can't
right now, 4 million is the very minimum of what our third line
yeah,
makes.
there you go. And I think even if he goes to an arbitrator, I'm pretty sure how arbitration works is that they look at how many points you've put up, but I feel like they also have to look in the past and see what you've averaged over your career. So obviously this is an outlier season, but I'm not necessarily saying he's gonna dip back down to a 20-point guy because obviously they see what he brings to the team. So I think if he does go to arbitration, it's still gonna be around, like, it's not gonna be over 4. I really don't think
Yeah,
so.
I'm not. exactly sure how that works because when he signed the contract, he was an RFA, but when he expires next year, he will be a UFA. So I don't know if he even has ARB rights. I don't know exactly. Do you know how that works? Because
That's a
I
good
think
point. I don't know.
anyway,
Is
nonetheless,
arbitrations only for RFAs?
if I'm not mistaken, yes. Like
Okay.
in most, unless you have arbitration rights in your contract, but I'm not exactly sure. But
Okay.
nonetheless, I do agree with you. I do agree with you. I do think that ultimately overpaying him a little bit is not the end of the world at all. I do think that to pay him 3.75 million might be like one of those contracts that you're like, wow, the fact that we even have him that cheap is crazy. And I mean, you can't deny the fact that he literally has 13 points in his last 20 games, and
Hmm.
he plays 15 minutes a game, and so many of those minutes come on the PK.
And
So
not to
and his own
mention,
starts.
yeah, and not to mention the Habs penalty kill is one of the best in the league this year. So,
You can't deny that.
if he does get over 4 and it's not a 5-year deal, I don't think I'm that upset.
No, no, I'm
Because
not. I just
if
again, yeah.
if it's like a
No, go
3-year
ahead.
deal, you live with it, the cap is going up and he brings some experience. You can't expect to be a playoff team if your bottom two centers are 22 years old.
Well,
So he
that's it, right? And I
brings,
and
yeah,
I and I
yeah,
guarantee you that every single team that's competing for a playoff spot right now would pay a premium to have Jake Evans in their bottom six. Because again,
100%.
he's like that Lekanen type that just brings a different dimension that is very rare. Like we always talked about Josh Anderson having a rare skill set because he's able to skate fast in a straight line with the puck. And turns out that it is a very rare skill set, but he hasn't been using it like the way that we wanted him to. But you can't teach faceoff wins. You can't teach defensive. I mean, you could, but you know what I mean? Like he has a knack for it. Like he is
Mhm.
top percentile in the league at what he does, and those are the things that you know a coach can only dream of having. So I'm all for it.
Yeah. All right.